The Fujifilm X100VI, arguably the hottest camera on the market today, and it's not hard to see why. It's beautifully designed, very high quality, shoots super flexible 40 megapixel RAWs or in-camera JPEGs with a timeless film aesthetic, has a built-in ND filter, 6 stops of IBIS, can capture 6.2K 10-bit video. The list really does go on. In fact, when I reviewed it last year, I said it was possibly the best street and travel photography camera you can currently buy. Hell, it's even the best street and travel photography camera I've ever tested, and that is not a statement that I make lightly. Not entirely sure why I'm whispering so much in that video, or maybe I'm just shouting more in my old age, who knows. But one thing I do know is that the X100VI is the camera that everyone wants, but few people can either afford it or in some cases even get hold of it. Well, the good news is that over the past few months I've been on somewhat of an APS-C compact binge, buying, testing and reviewing some of the best X100VI alternatives out there. So in this video I'm going to be comparing these 5 premium compact cameras directly with the Fujifilm X100VI and then ranking them to see which ones are hot and which ones aren't so hot, more like lukewarm. So starting everything off with a banger, this is the Nikon Coolpix A, a camera that should have dominated the street photography world if Nikon hadn't have sort of quietly released it in 2013 then immediately forgot it existed like it was the intern's idea and everyone was just too polite to say no. But despite this camera's initial shortcomings, the Coolpix A is a seriously good camera. You've got a 16.2 megapixel APS-C sensor, the same one pulled straight out of the Nikon D7000, paired with a razor-sharp 28mm equivalent f2.8 lens and full manual controls. The build quality is top tier with a proper metal chassis. The lens itself is able to retract whilst not in use, helping to keep this profile nice and slim, and there's even a manual focus ring around the lens should you prefer to use zone focusing. The images are sharp, clean and punchy, and it even has a handful of color profiles in camera to pick from, allowing you to capture nice looking JPEGs straight out the camera without any editing. Sure, it's not Fujifilm level of choice and customizability, but it's certainly better than nothing. So where does this camera win over the X100VI? Well, the fact that it's much smaller and lighter is, in my opinion at least, the biggest advantage to owning this camera, because you don't have to have this thing permanently dangling around your neck or from a wrist strap all day. It can tuck neatly away into your pocket and go with you everywhere. A big advantage for candid styles of photography. It weighs practically nothing too, coming in at just under 300 grams or around 10.5 ounces, unlike the X100VI, which we all know is a bit of a beefy boy.
Damn boy, he's thick!
But as we all know, nothing in life is totally perfect, so let's touch on some of the cons. For starters, there's no IBIS, there's no built-in ND filter, and no Wi-Fi connectivity. But more importantly, there isn't a flip-out screen or an EVF, which can make hip-level shooting a bit of a guessing game. Well, that is unless you pair it with one of these cheap and cheerful optical viewfinders like I did. And this thing just simply slides into the hot shoe port on the top of the camera and is definitely something I would recommend if you like shooting from the hip like I do. I think this thing cost me around $50 in total, so it's really not horrendously expensive, and if you are interested I will leave a link in the video description and in a pinned comment below as to where you can find one if you want one for yourself. Anyway, don't expect any impressive video specs on this camera either. There's just very basic 1080 HD capture. But seeing as this was made in 2013, we do have to give it a little bit of slack. Now with that in mind, the autofocus really isn't what I would describe as lightning fast either, but certainly usable provided you have the patience, of course. Now, whilst all of those points might not make it quite as powerful as the X100VI, it still is an incredibly enjoyable camera to shoot with, and provided you can get one for a decent price, because at the moment they tend to sell anywhere between $400 and $600, I'm going to happily slap this in the A tier, which is kind of fitting given the name now I think about it. Now, staying on the topic of price, I do want to share a bit of a secret with you, because these days I rarely buy cameras from the usual auction sites like eBay, and that's because instead I tend to buy a lot of my cameras, including most of the ones featured within this video, directly from Japan. Why? Well, because it's a lot cheaper. I can sometimes save myself a few $100 if I find a particularly good bargain. But buying from Japan used to be a bit of a minefield, unless of course you can speak fluent Japanese, can get a flight out there cheap enough, or happen to have someone on the inside doing the dodgy deals for you. Well, not anymore that is, because these days you can use Buyee, who are also the sponsors of this episode. Now, if you've not heard of Buyee before, it's a website that allows you to browse and bid on Japanese auction sites like Yahoo Auctions, Mercari, and Rakuten, and it translates them all into English or a choice of other languages. Once you win a bid, Buyee also helps to handle the shipping process too. That includes arranging for the item to be shipped to one of their warehouses where it will be inspected to make sure it's actually as described on the auction. They then package it all up securely and arrange forwarding straight to your doorstep. If you buy multiple items, you can also bundle them all together into a single parcel to help reduce shipping costs. This month, there are coupons available for all first-time Buyee users, allowing you to get discounts on things like purchased items, service fees, and even half-price international shipping. And you can combine all of these coupons together for even bigger savings on your orders. So if you want to check out Buyee for yourself, I've dropped a link in the pinned comment below and in the video description. It's completely free to sign up and browse, so you really don't have anything to lose. Anyway, moving on to the next camera now, and on paper, this thing should have absolutely destroyed the competition, but instead it kind of just disappeared into the background like John Cena at a hide-and-seek tournament. I'm talking, of course, about the Canon G1X Mark III, and this thing is actually a bit of a unicorn. It's the only camera in Canon's compact lineup to feature an APS-C size sensor, and somehow they managed to cram it into a body that's weather-sealed, has built-in IBIS, a built-in ND filter, a fully articulating touchscreen, an EVF, and even a retractable zoom lens that covers a 24 to 72mm equivalent field of view. That's one hell of a feature list, especially for a camera this well made that can fit right in your jacket pocket. Now, notice how I said jacket pocket, because yeah, unfortunately this is a little too chunky to slide into your jeans like a Belarusian stripper. Now, being a Canon camera, as you would kind of expect, the image quality is also very solid. It features the same 24 megapixel sensor found in Canon's similarly aged DSLRs and M-series mirrorless bodies, so the raw files give you plenty of room to play around in post-production. Sadly though, this is the only camera in this lineup that doesn't offer any fancy in-camera color profiles for shooting JPEGs, well, unless you count these god-awful creative modes, which, just to be clear, I do not. They're an abomination, and I refuse to talk about them any further. Anyway, seeing as JPEG color profiles aren't an option with this camera, that's exactly why I shot everything in RAW and then used my own custom Lightroom presets to color grade all of these images. Now, the presets that I've made have been designed to work across any make or model of camera, no matter the age, and they dramatically speed up your workflow while still giving you pro-level results, even if you've got the editing skills of a raccoon on meth. And the proof is in the pudding, because every single photo you've seen so far and are going to see throughout this video, regardless of the camera, has been graded using these presets, so they really do work. So if you want to try them out for yourself, be sure to hit the link in the pinned comment and use the discount code you'll find down there to grab yourself 10% off your next purchase. You'll thank me later, or if not, please direct all of your complaints to my customer service representative using the email on screen here. And please do ensure that your messages are as brutal and vulgar as possible. Mark is always happy to hear all of your complaints.
Tom, I told you to stop with this. I'm calling the police.
Moving on, you've also got Canon's dual pixel AF for snappy focusing, and the camera itself is pretty lightweight too, coming in at just under 400 grams or around 14 ounces. Overall, this is just a camera that feels and handles like a proper camera and not some kind of cheap point and shoot. But of course, there are going to be some cons. The main one for me being the piss poor battery life. So if you do buy this camera, make sure you pack a spare cell or 12 before you head out on a day of shooting. The video specs are also pretty pedestrian, topping out at 1080p HD, but again, somewhat to be expected given its age. Finally, these things can get a little bit pricey, usually selling for somewhere between $700 and $900, but still much cheaper than the X100VI. But all of that said, whilst this might not look quite as sexy as the Fujifilm, I really do think this is a wildly underrated camera. So for that reason, I think we've found ourselves our first S-tier camera. Okay, so this next one is a little bit special, and I'm not talking Donald Trump's economic strategy meeting kind of special. No, this one is special because it really should cost way more than it does. This is the Leica X1, and it's quickly being dubbed as the cheapest Leica you can buy, which I know is a bit like like saying the least Botox-filled Kardashian, but stick with me here. Price between $500 and $600. Sure, it's gonna sting your wallet a little bit, but for a camera with this fancy red dot on the front, that's an absolute steal. And is not one of those rebranded Panasonic rip-offs like the Deluxe series. No, this camera was actually developed by Leica themselves, so you are getting quality. Now, before we start rattling off all the specs, I do need to mention that this is a camera from 2009, so this old dog has aged about as well as, well, a fine milk in terms of specs, so let's go easy on him, okay? Anyway, inside you get a 12 megapixel APS-C size sensor, a fixed 36mm equivalent f2.8 lens, full manual controls, and of course the premium Leica build quality and all of the prestige that comes with that. It's definitely the best looking camera of the bunch, in my opinion at least, and certainly the closest to match the retro film-like aesthetic of the X100VI. It's certainly a fair bit lighter and not quite as tanky as the proper M-series rangefinders, but it's still premium where it counts, and obviously having a camera that's lighter and smaller isn't really a bad thing in the realm of, well, small and portable cameras. It has an aluminium top, tactile metal dials, and a sexy minimalist layout. It's all very, well, Leica, like it's been engineered for quiet contemplation and an evening listening to soft jazz.
Welcome to Jazz Club. Nice.
But like I said, this is pretty old now, and just like my granddad getting up to use the bathroom for the 13th time in one day, it's glacially slow. Well, I mean, my granddad's dead now, so technically he's a lot slower than this thing, but let's not get distracted. The startup time is slow, the autofocus is, you guessed it, slow, and the burst mode, well, there really isn't any meaningful burst mode. But honestly, once you know and accept its limitations, this camera becomes oddly enjoyable. Plus, the image quality is just beautiful, even for a 12 megapixel sensor. There are even a handful of color profiles built into the camera so that you can skip the editing process entirely and shoot nice looking JPEGs straight out of the camera. The mono mode in particular is a firm favorite of mine. But when I said that this camera was minimalist, I really did mean it, because there's no touchscreen, the screen is fixed in place, there's not even an EVF. Plus, this is also the only camera in this lineup to not have any video capture options at all, like nothing. This camera, like most Leicas to be fair, is all about the vibe. For some people, that'll be enough, and I for one can certainly find enjoyment in that. But for others, this might be just a little bit too far removed from the modern conveniences of the X100VI. So for that reason, I am going to have to put this one in the C tier. Now next up we have the Fujifilm X70, which is essentially the weird artsy cousin of the X100VI. But in some ways, this one actually might offer a number of unexpected advantages. You've got the same 16.3 megapixel X-Trans 2 APS-C sensor found in Fuji's professional tier X Pro 2, a fixed 28mm equivalent f2.8 lens, full manual controls, and a fully tilting screen, which makes waist level shooting an absolute breeze. But unlike the X100VI, the X70 is way smaller, way lighter, and more importantly, cheaper. The images it captures have classic Fujifilm colors, the lens is nice and sharp even when shooting wide open, and of course it has access to Fuji's legendary lineup of film simulation modes. But if shooting RAW is more your thing, then the good news is that this X-Trans 2 sensor provides plenty of flexibility in post. Now whilst the AF isn't what I would consider lightning fast, it is still more than capable in 2025, and the whole thing weighs less than a can of beans and is small enough to slip inside your pocket without landing you on some kind of register. Is it perfect? Well, no, of course not. For starters, there's no EVF, which might be a bit of a deal breaker for some, though to be fair, Fuji did offer an optional optical viewfinder for this thing if you really did need something to peer through besides your neighbour's letterbox. What, just me? Anyway, just like the other options in this lineup, video specs are capped at basic 1080 HD capture, and unfortunately these things can get a little bit pricey. So whilst that's where my list of complaints ends, it does make it a little bit tough to rank this camera. Now, I personally think that it is actually better than the Nikon Coolpix A, mainly due to it having a slightly better AF system, the advantage of a tiltable touchscreen, and a roster of Fujifilm film simulation modes to pick from. But it's also nowhere near as competitively spec'd as the Canon, with its weather sealing, EVF, zoom lens, IBIS, and built-in ND. So to make things fair, I am going to have to reluctantly move the Nikon down a spot to the B tier to make room for the X70 in the A tier. Sorry, Nikon.
Yeah, boy.
Now, if the Fuji X100VI is the sexy, charismatic lead singer of the band, then this next camera is probably the quiet bassist who often shows up late to practice, smells a bit like coffee and cigarettes, but can absolutely shred when called upon. This, as many of you will already know, is the Ricoh GR3X, a camera that is widely regarded as the one and only true rival to the Fujifilm X100VI. It has a 24.2 megapixel APS-C sensor, an equivalent 40mm f2.8 lens, in-body stabilization, a built-in ND filter, touchscreen controls, and some of the nicest JPEG color modes outside of the Fujifilm environment. The autofocus is decent, and the startup time is absolutely lightning fast. We're talking just over a second from pressing the power button to taking your first photo, which is pretty insane. The lens in particular is really sharp too. Now, the 40mm focal length on the front here feels right for somebody like me who tends to float somewhere between 35 and 50mm given the option, though I should mention that the original GR3 is exactly the same camera as this one, just with a wider 28mm equivalent field of view, which is probably the one to go for if you prefer shooting slightly wider. Now, there are of course some downsides, well, maybe not downsides, more like nitpicks if I'm being totally honest. The build quality for one could be a little bit more premium feeling given the price, because this thing does feel a little bit on the plasticky side given the $900 to $1,200 price range. Video is also capped at 1080 HD only, which by this point should be expected, and there's no EVF or tiltable screen, but none of these things really put me off using this camera in the slightest. And yes, there is now the GR4 about to hit shelves, so to many people this version might be considered obsolete, but they really couldn't be more wrong. Unless you're desperate for subject detection AF, slightly faster processing, and some of the other mod cons that the newer version offers, then this GR3 is still one of the best shooters on the market, and hopefully we'll see the prices start to fall as the GR4 rolls out. So it's going straight into the S tier, right? Well, no, actually. In fact, despite my love for this camera, when I compare it to the Canon, we have a similar situation to the Fuji X70. Both of these cameras might be smaller, lighter, and more pocketable, but for the price, the Canon just offers way more value and is much more closer in terms of specs to the X100VI than any of the other options on the list. So as good as this Ricoh is, it's gonna have to chill with the X70 in tier A. So there you have it. In my humble opinion, if you're looking for the closest match to the X100VI without the hideous price tag, then the Canon G1X Mark III is the best option of the 5 that I've tested. But if having a camera with maximum portability and the added luxury of in-camera color grades to choose from is more your thing, then going for either the Fujifilm X70 or the Ricoh GR3X would be my recommendation.